Sarah Mitchell never imagined that walking away from her corporate nightmare would lead to poetic justice served ice cold. After enduring 3 years of psychological warfare at Morrison Financial, she resigned without notice on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, leaving behind a six-figure salary and a boss who had systematically destroyed her confidence. 6 months later, sitting in her new corner office as head of talent acquisition at a Fortune 500 competitor, she opened a resume that made her coffee mug freeze halfway to her lips. Victoria Lang, the executive who had sabotaged projects, stolen credit, and driven 2 employees to mental breakdowns, was applying for a position under Sarah's direct supervision. Some applications deserve more than a standard rejection. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Torment. Sarah Mitchell arrived at Morrison Financial in March 2021 with the kind of optimism that only comes from escaping a stagnant career. At 34, she had spent 8 years at a mid-tier consulting firm where her analytical brilliance generated millions in client savings but barely registered on performance reviews. Morrison Financial represented everything she had worked toward: a senior analyst position with a prestigious investment firm where intelligence actually mattered and excellence earned recognition. The first 6 months validated every sacrifice she had made to get there. Sarah redesigned the risk assessment model that had plagued the derivatives team for years, saving the company $4 million in her first quarter alone. The chief financial officer personally thanked her during an all-hands meeting. Colleagues sought her expertise on complex valuations. The head of fixed income tried to poach her twice, offering a 20% salary increase that Sarah politely declined out of loyalty to her team. Sarah's workspace reflected her methodical nature. Color-coded project folders lined her desk in order of deadline proximity. 3 monitors displayed real-time market data, analytical models, and communication channels simultaneously. She arrived at 7 each morning, not from pressure, but from genuine enthusiasm for untangling financial complexities that others found impenetrable. Her lunch hours were spent mentoring junior analysts who reminded her of her younger self, hungry for knowledge but unsure how to navigate corporate politics. Everything changed when Victoria Lang arrived as the new department director in September 2021. Victoria entered Morrison Financial with a reputation that preceded her like expensive perfume, intoxicating to executives, suffocating to everyone else. Harvard MBA, 15 years at Goldman Sachs, a LinkedIn profile featuring endorsements from CEOs whose names graced business magazines. At 41, she dressed in designer suits that cost more than most employees' monthly rent and spoke with the calculated precision of someone who practiced conversations in mirrors. Upper management celebrated her arrival as a coup for the company. The transformation began subtly. Victoria requested one-on-one meetings with each team member to understand their strengths and ongoing projects. Sarah presented her innovative hedging strategy that could potentially save Morrison Financial $12 million annually. Victoria listened intently, taking detailed notes, asking penetrating questions that showcased her intelligence. Sarah left the meeting energized, believing she had finally found a leader who recognized potential. 2 weeks later, Victoria presented Sarah's hedging strategy to the board of directors as her own innovation, developed through her experience at Goldman Sachs. When Sarah confronted her privately, Victoria gaslit with surgical precision. She claimed Sarah had misunderstood, that the strategy was actually something Victoria had been developing for years, and Sarah's input had merely confirmed her existing theories. The conversation ended with Victoria suggesting Sarah should be grateful for the learning opportunity of watching a senior executive operate. The psychological warfare escalated methodically. Victoria assigned Sarah impossible deadlines, then publicly criticized delays she had deliberately engineered. She would request complex analysis at 4:30 on Friday afternoons, demanding completion by Monday morning, then berate Sarah for work-life balance issues when she worked weekends. During team meetings, Victoria interrupted Sarah's presentations to correct non-existent errors, undermining her credibility with theatrical disappointment. Other team members noticed the pattern. Marcus Chun, a portfolio manager with 10 years at Morrison, quietly warned Sarah that she wasn't Victoria's first target. Two analysts had transferred to different departments within months of Victoria's arrival. Another had taken indefinite medical leave for stress-related illness. The pattern was always identical. Victoria identified the strongest performers, systematically destroyed their confidence, then absorbed their innovations as her own achievements. Sarah began documenting everything. Screenshots of timestamp-altered emails where Victoria retroactively changed deadlines. Meeting recordings where Victoria contradicted previous instructions. Witness statements from colleagues who observed the abuse. She compiled a 40-page dossier and presented it to Human Resources in December 2021. HR's response came wrapped in corporate doublespeak. They acknowledged Sarah's concerns, but suggested she might be misinterpreting Victoria's demanding leadership style. They recommended communication workshops and offered to mediate a discussion about expectations. When Sarah insisted on a formal investigation, HR reminded her that Victoria had increased department revenue by 30% in just 3 months, neglecting to mention it was through strategies Victoria had stolen from her team. Chapter 2. The Cost of Freedom. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in February 2022, disguised as another routine humiliation. Victoria had scheduled an emergency client presentation, informing Sarah just 90 minutes before a room full of executives expected to see quarterly projections that typically required days of preparation. When Sarah somehow delivered a competent presentation using previous work she had archived, Victoria interrupted 17 times to highlight insignificant formatting inconsistencies while clients shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The final interruption came when Victoria apologized to clients for her team's persistent mediocrity, staring directly at Sarah while speaking. Sarah submitted her resignation that afternoon without another position secured, without a recommendation letter, and without the standard 2 weeks notice that corporate protocol demanded. She cleaned her desk in 12 minutes, handed her access badge to security, and walked into the February rain feeling something she hadn't experienced in months, relief mixed with absolute terror. Her savings account held 4 months of expenses if she lived frugally. Her professional network consisted mainly of Morrison employees who wouldn't dare oppose Victoria publicly. The first week of unemployment felt like recovering from an illness. Sarah slept past sunrise for the first time in years, discovering that her body had been running on cortisol and determination rather than actual rest. Anxiety attacks that had become daily occurrences under Victoria's management gradually decreased to twice weekly, then occasionally. She deleted Morrison Financial's email app from her phone and felt phantom vibrations for days afterward, her nervous system still anticipating Victoria's after-hours demands. Financial reality struck during week 2. Sarah calculated her burn rate with the same precision she had once applied to derivative valuations. Rent consumed 40% of her savings. Health insurance through Cobra would cost $1,400 monthly. The student loans she had been aggressively paying down still demanded $600 each month. She eliminated every non-essential expense, canceled subscriptions, and learned to cook meals that cost less than $3 per serving. Pride prevented her from telling friends why she suddenly declined dinner invitations. The job search began with optimism that curdled into confusion. Sarah's resume showcased exceptional achievements: the $4 million risk model revision, the hedging strategy that Victoria had stolen, and consistent outperformance of market benchmarks. She tailored cover letters with the same attention she had given to financial reports. The first wave of applications generated promising responses. Phone screenings went well, with recruiters expressing genuine enthusiasm about her experience. Then the pattern emerged. Second interviews would be scheduled and mysteriously canceled. References would be checked, followed by awkward emails about positions being suddenly filled internally. One hiring manager accidentally forwarded an email chain where someone had provided an informal reference about Sarah being difficult to manage and unable to handle pressure. The person was never named, but Sarah recognized Victoria's fingerprints on sabotage. Victoria's network spread through the industry like invisible poison. Harvard alumni connections, Goldman Sachs veterans, and executives who valued relationships over truth. Sarah discovered through a sympathetic former colleague that Victoria had been making calls, expressing concern about Sarah's mental stability and tendency toward paranoia. The words were carefully chosen to avoid legal liability while effectively blacklisting Sarah from any firm that might compete with Morrison Financial. Depression settled over Sarah's apartment like fog. She spent entire days in pajamas, refreshing job boards that seemed to mock her with positions she was qualified for but would never get. The anxiety attacks returned with reinforcement, bringing insomnia that made clear thinking impossible. She found herself apologizing to recruiters for wasting their time, internalizing Victoria's gaslighting about her own incompetence. The confident analyst who had redesigned risk models dissolved into someone who struggled to write cover letters without second-guessing every word. Month 3 brought desperation. Sarah expanded her search to positions below her experience level, different cities, and even different industries. She considered returning to her previous consulting firm, but learned Victoria had contacted them too. The savings account dwindled toward zero. She sold professional clothes she might never need again, keeping one interview suit that hung in her closet like a museum piece from a different life. Chapter 3: Rising from the Ashes. The call from Nexus Global arrived on a Thursday afternoon in May 2022, when Sarah had been practicing resignation speeches for minimum wage positions. The recruiter, Amanda Torres, spoke with unusual directness. She acknowledged hearing references about Sarah, but recognized the pattern of a smear campaign. Amanda had seen it before, having once been targeted herself by a toxic executive who tried to destroy her career after she reported sexual harassment. Nexus Global's CEO, Patricia Donovan, specifically sought talent that had been undervalued or unfairly sidelined by the old boys network that still dominated Wall Street. Sarah's interview process at Nexus felt like emerging from underground into sunlight. Instead of hostile interrogations designed to expose weakness, she encountered genuine conversations about innovation and values. The hiring panel included 2 women who had left Morrison Financial years earlier, both sharing knowing looks when Sarah carefully explained her departure. They asked about her analytical methods, her leadership philosophy, and her vision for financial technology advancement. Nobody questioned her mental stability or ability to handle pressure. Nexus Global offered Sarah a position as Senior Talent Acquisition Specialist, technically lateral to her previous role, but in a completely different department. The salary matched Morrison Financial, but the cultural difference felt invaluable. Patricia Donovan personally onboarded Sarah, explaining that Nexus had been building a team of exceptional professionals who had been pushed out of toxic environments elsewhere. She called it collecting diamonds that others had mistaken for coal, and assured Sarah that her analytical background would revolutionize how Nexus approached recruitment. Sarah's first month at Nexus required recalibration of everything she had learned about corporate survival. Meetings began with genuine check-ins about well-being. Colleagues shared credit generously, even insisting Sarah's name appear first on joint proposals. Her supervisor, Michael Chong, scheduled weekly one-on-ones that actually focused on her professional development rather than manufacturing criticism. When Sarah suggested applying predictive analytics to identify high-potential candidates, Michael immediately allocated budget and resources for her pilot program. The transformation wasn't merely professional. Sarah's anxiety attacks ceased entirely by month 2. She stopped checking her phone obsessively during evenings, trusting that any after-hours communication would be genuinely urgent rather than deliberately disruptive. The weight she had lost during her Morrison ordeal returned gradually as stress no longer destroyed her appetite. Colleagues invited her to lunch without ulterior motives, building friendships rather than alliances. Sarah's analytical approach to talent acquisition generated immediate results. She developed an algorithm that identified candidates whose career trajectories had been artificially suppressed, brilliant professionals whose potential had been overlooked due to bias, politics, or toxic leadership. Within 3 months, her methodology had recruited 17 exceptional employees who transformed their departments. The chief technology officer credited Sarah with finding the architect behind Nexus's revolutionary new trading platform. The head of compliance praised her for discovering a risk analyst whose work prevented a $12 million regulatory fine. Patricia Donovan took notice. In September 2022, just 4 months after Sarah's arrival, Patricia promoted her to head of talent acquisition. The position reported directly to the C-suite and included oversight of a 20-person team. Sarah's imposter syndrome whispered that she didn't deserve such rapid advancement, but her results argued otherwise. Her recruitment strategies had decreased hiring time by 40% while improving new employee retention to 92%, the highest in Nexus's history. Sarah used her new position to build something Victoria would never understand, a network based on mutual support rather than mutual destruction. She quietly connected with other professionals who had escaped toxic environments, creating an informal support system for those still trapped. Through LinkedIn messages and coffee meetings, she learned about Victoria's victims at previous companies. The pattern stretched back 15 years across 4 different firms, always the same methodology of identify, destroy, and absorb credit for others' work. By November 2022, Sarah had compiled detailed documentation of Victoria's history, not for revenge, but for protection. She discovered that Victoria had left Goldman Sachs under suspicious circumstances involving falsified performance metrics. Morrison Financial had been her 4th attempt at executive positioning through destructive manipulation. 2 former employees had filed lawsuits that were settled quietly, their silence purchased with non-disclosure agreements. Chapter 4. The Perfect Interview. The universe occasionally delivers justice with theatrical precision. Victoria Lang's resume arrived at Nexus Global on a Monday morning in December 2022, uploaded through their executive recruitment portal at exactly 9:15. Sarah was reviewing applications for a new senior director of strategic development position when the familiar name appeared on her screen. Her coffee mug paused midway to her lips as she read Victoria's carefully crafted narrative of her Morrison Financial experience, which conveniently ended in October 2022 with no explanation for the gap. Sarah's first instinct was to delete the application immediately, but something made her investigate further. She initiated a discreet background check through Nexus's enhanced vetting process, which revealed what Victoria's polished resume omitted. Morrison Financial had terminated Victoria for embezzling $300,000 through a sophisticated scheme involving phantom consultants and falsified invoices. The investigation was ongoing, with federal prosecutors building a case that Morrison had kept quiet to avoid shareholder panic. The opportunity wasn't just for justice, it was for legal accountability. Sarah contacted Amanda Torres from HR, who happened to have a brother working in the FBI's white-collar crime division. Amanda made the introduction, and Special Agent Daniel Foster revealed they had been tracking Victoria across state lines for similar schemes at 3 previous companies. They needed her to make one more attempt at fraud to establish a pattern for RICO charges. Victoria's application to Nexus could provide that final piece. Sarah assembled an interview panel that happened to include 3 other professionals who had experienced Victoria's destruction firsthand. But this time, Special Agent Foster would be observing from an adjacent room, recording everything through Nexus's security system with proper warrants. Patricia Donovan approved the operation, understanding that helping prosecute a serial corporate predator aligned with Nexus's values of integrity. Victoria arrived for her interview on December 15th, wearing a $3,000 Saint Laurent suit that investigators would later discover was purchased with embezzled funds. Her expression when she entered the conference room and saw Sarah at the head of the table shifted through multiple stages: surprise, calculation, and finally a practiced smile that suggested she believed she could manipulate this situation to her advantage. The interview proceeded with Sarah asking standard questions while Victoria wove an elaborate fiction. She claimed credit for $20 million in portfolio growth that Sarah knew belonged to Marcus Chun. She described innovative strategies stolen from employees across 4 companies. Most significantly, she presented forged recommendation letters from executives who had actually filed complaints against her. Each lie was being recorded by federal agents who had spent months documenting her pattern of deception. The critical moment came when Victoria handed over a portfolio of her supposed achievements. Hidden within the legitimate documents were falsified financial statements from Morrison Financial, altered to hide the embezzlement. She was attempting to use fraudulent documents to obtain a position where she would have access to Nexus's financial systems, a federal crime that crossed state lines. Agent Foster later explained this was exactly what they needed to upgrade charges from state embezzlement to federal wire fraud and racketeering. Victoria grew increasingly confident as the interview progressed, interpreting the panel's careful questions as genuine interest. She began making promises about bringing proprietary Morrison strategies to Nexus. Unaware, she was confessing to intellectual property theft. When asked about her references, she provided contact information for executives she had fabricated entirely, complete with fake phone numbers that the FBI had already traced to burner phones in her possession. The arrest happened in Nexus Global's Marble Lobby 40 minutes after the interview concluded. Federal agents had waited until Victoria attempted to access Nexus's visitor Wi-Fi to upload additional fraudulent documents to their system, another federal crime to add to the charges. Sarah watched from her office window as Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her designer heels clicking against the marble one final time. The trial revealed Victoria's full history. 17 victims across 15 years for $1 million embezzled, and countless careers destroyed for sport and profit. She received 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Sarah testified as a key witness, finally able to present the documentation she had been gathering. The other victims formed a support group that continues meeting monthly. Sometimes karma keeps receipts and presents them at the perfect moment. How many toxic bosses are creating their own downfall right now through their abuse? Share your workplace justice stories below and subscribe for more tales where corporate predators finally face consequences.